stated preference approach, where you generally use a questionnaire to ask people more direct questions about how much they would be willing to pay to protect the habitat of a certain aquatic species, for example. And so we decided to use a method called choice modelling, which is that latter set of methods that I mentioned. It's a stated preference technique. And so the way in which this works is it's almost like a marketing survey. So if you pretend that a tropical river is a product that we can offer to people, and we can show them many different versions of that product, we try and set out a couple of different attributes. So here in the left-hand column, so here are the attributes, for example, of the Daly River. So the area of floodplain that's in good environmental condition, the quality of the river for recreational fishing, the condition of waterholes important to Aboriginal people, and then income from irrigated agriculture. And so each of those attributes can vary over a couple of different levels. And so we've got option 1 and option 2 and option 3. And each of those represent different management scenarios. So option 3 is an example of a scenario where we're not doing much more than we are now. We're obviously following legislation and regulations, but we're not putting any more money into it. So the cost, how much would I pay, that's associated with option 3 is nil. Options 1 and 2 present an option where we're putting a little bit more money into the management of these river systems, and it means that we may be able to get slightly different outcomes. And so each of those are associated with a different payment. And so we set up this hypothetical scenario for people, and we ask them to make these sorts of choices. And so what they're having to do here is make some trade-offs. So they're like, well, okay, I'd like a little bit more floodplain in good environmental condition, but I only want to pay $10. So hang on, I've got to trade off a little bit there. What do I really value? What's really important to me? So we use a questionnaire technique to present a number of these. They're called choice sets. And so we sent out this questionnaire first we sent out 3,377 introductory letters to people around the country. We sent them to people in each of the river catchments, to people in each of the capital cities of the river catchments, so Darwin, Perth and Brisbane, and also to people in cities further south in Australia, because we want a range of opinions. We know that all people in Australia are really stakeholders of what happens in Northern Australia. And so we had 477 return to senders, and so then we sent out 2,900 of these mail-out questionnaires. And we sent out, even numbers to each of the different places. And the response rate for the mail-out survey was 32%, which is quite impressive for this kind of survey. So that's about 921 questionnaires returned. What we also did is we did about 170 face-to-face questionnaires with Aboriginal people in each catchment. We know that Aboriginal people are a significant landholder, and we also know that they might have been limited in their ability to engage if it just landed on their doorstep. So we thought it was important to make sure we engaged Indigenous people in this. And so to do that, we employed a couple of Indigenous research assistants. So here on the left is young April Morindo. She's a Gooniyandi woman from just outside Fitzroy Crossing up in the Kimberley. And we went out and visited we spoke to 90 different people in many different communities around Fitzroy Crossing and Derby. And we had a fabulous time. That's William Shaw giving us some trouble there. And then also we did the questionnaires in and around Derby. So we would either be sitting outside in the 42 degrees or sitting inside, hopefully with a bit of air conditioning. And I did that towards the end of last year. And so what will we be able to provide when the analysis is complete? So what we're going to be able to talk about is what is the welfare gain or loss in dollar terms of having an extra kilometre squared of floodplain in good environmental condition, or having a slightly better quality of river for recreational fishing, or slightly better quality of waterhole that's important to Aboriginal people. and also an extra level of income from irrigated agriculture. So we're going to be able to include those attributes in a cost-benefit analysis if we're going to be trying to weigh up, well, what's the value of this development scenario as opposed to this development scenario? So the costs and benefits that we've been estimating will be able to be incorporated into that analysis. And so the story is it's about having a full set of costs and benefits instead of having a bunch of impacts that are spoken about in dollar terms, and then there's the qualitative stuff. You know, we might make it harder for Indigenous people to do what they like to do, or we might lose some habitat for water birds. We'll be able to speak about them in the same terms. And so the third and final point I want to make is that there are many other ways for making good decisions and many other ways for incorporating different types of values into our decision making. Economic valuation is just one approach, and it's a contentious one, and it's certainly not a panacea. And usually it's part of a range of tools that are used to assess the impacts and also to incorporate a better understanding of our natural wealth into our decision making. And so I just wanted to finish by telling you a little bit about what might be coming on the horizon. So these are a few ideas that are exciting me about how we make better decisions. So one thing that I didn't mention explicitly, but this is a part of the triple bottom line approach, saying that we know there are environmental impacts, we know there are economic impacts, and we know that there are social impacts for any policy or development. And so one way in which we're starting to think about this as an extension of that is to say, so we're not just weighing the social, economic and environmental impacts, but now we're asking questions about whether a development trajectory is actually going to make us more or less capable of coping with future events, like the impacts of climate change, for example. And so this is generally a notion of system resilience. We're asking, how is a development or policy going to impact on the ability of this whole system to respond to or bounce back from various threats or disturbances in the future? So that's kind of scaling up, and it's using it's a criteria at a whole different level. It's saying, we know the environment, economic and social impacts are important, but we also know that they all interact with each other. And what happens when you ask that question at the bigger system level? So that's the idea of system resilience and scaling up that question. So an interesting thought for me is, well, how do you capture that as a criteria in making decisions? And what then is the role of economic valuation in this process? And so there are a couple of nutty questions. You know, these things have kept me going for a couple of years. Some interesting bones to chew on. So in summary, I'd just like to say that ecosystem services of tropical rivers are important, and I've shown you a couple of those and made them more obvious. And the notion of ecosystem services is becoming taken up in public policy discussions, and the way in which we account for these ecosystem services is becoming more and more talked about, and we're slowly finding ways of dealing with these things that are difficult to see and difficult to get our heads around. So economic valuation can play an important role in furthering that goal. The main benefit of economic valuation is that it helps us to incorporate the full costs and benefits into our decision-making processes. And it's certainly not, the only way of doing that, but it's at least provides a lot more information than we had before. And then in terms of the future, the way in which we might make better decisions in the future, we're starting to ask about the longer-term impacts of our decisions and how they impact at the whole system level. So there are a bunch of interesting questions for you to ponder, and hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion now.